Well, being a good neighbor used to mean having the freedom to just drop by. Drop in on one's neighbors unannounced and to receive your neighbors when they did that. Not anymore. Not only don't we not make a practice of dropping by, but we don't want others to do that to us either. Good thing a Samaritan long ago had a different view of dropping by and staying by his neighbor. Now, I heard a story about a farm boy who accidentally overturned his wagon load of wheat on the road one day, and the farmer who lived nearby came over to investigate. "Hey, Willis," he said, "forget your troubles and come on over and have dinner with us, and then I'll come back with you and help you right the wagon." "Well, that's very nice of you, sir," Willis answered, "but I don't think Dad would like it." "Well, come on, son," the farmer insisted. "Well, okay," the boy finally agreed, "but Dad isn't going to like it." After a hearty dinner, Willis thanked his host, and he said, "I feel a whole lot better, but, I know Dad's going to be really upset with me now." "Don't be silly, Willis. Let's go over and right the wagon now. By the way, where is your dad?" He said, "Underneath the wagon." Now, I'm guessing that this particular response isn't exactly what Jesus was looking for when he told this story. I guess a big part of being a good neighbor is actually paying attention in each and every situation, each encounter, and asking that important question, what would Jesus do? As a young elder in the 1980s, oh boy, I thought I was way too young to be an elder. Talked to one of my friends at the church, a seasoned old elder named Bob Toberman, and I asked him, I said, I'm only in my 30s. I don't think I can be an elder yet. And he said, "Oh, no, being an elder is easy." And I said, "Well, what's it all about?" And he said, "Well, basically you're a fruit inspector." And I said, "A fruit inspector?" I said, "I'm not going to be judging people." He said, No, not judging people. Fruit inspector is somebody who looks and sees fruit being produced and then encourages it. I said, "Yeah, I guess I can do that, yeah." So I'm a young elder at a church in Plano, Texas, and I remember being part of this evangelism group at the church in Plano. Now, back then, I wasn't as reserved as I am now, And we got so excited. We went to some training, and a bunch of us really got fired up about a whole new effort in our church. It was called Evangelism Explosion. That's a good name, huh? And so, using what we had just learned, we set out to visit folks in the new neighborhoods that were rising up all around the church. We went house to house to house. And sadly, we discovered how things had changed since Evangelism Explosion was developed many years before. A program that used to work well had clearly become outdated. The social dynamics in this burgeoning, fast-growing town of Plano were changing, and we really needed to modify our approach. And so we started putting door hangers on doors, and we went out to public events in the park and engaged people at various things like that. And then we involved ourselves in community organization, as many efforts as possible where the larger community could see that we took our faith seriously. But face it, while we all want to be good neighbors, the meaning of neighborliness had changed. It has changed. It's continuing to change as American culture morphs from country to city, from home cooking to fast cooking, fast food, right? From dining room to game room, from open neighborhoods to gated communities. People just don't drop by or drop in like they used to anymore. We at one time in our life, Linda and I lived in a gated community. I don't know how we ended up there, but we used to have to give people the code to get in, to come by. People just don't drop by anymore. And what's more, we don't want them to drop by either. Oh, I realize that that's not true everywhere. That may still be the charm of a small town like Newport, Arkansas. It certainly was in Iola, Kansas, Linda's last pastorate, about 6,000 people, where people drop by all the time, and we drop by all the time. It said that a rising tide raises everybody's boat together. And good neighborliness used to begin with social calls, didn't it? Which can be a way to build a much stronger sense of community and connectedness. So first things first, our great-grandparents would have considered it bad manners if we didn't answer the door, right? You aren't supposed to ignore your neighbors. And in pre-telephone America, dropping by for an unannounced visit was customary. It was how folks stayed in touch. It was a large part of the social glue. Visitors were expected, and patterns for visitation were formalized, weren't they? For example, never arrive before lunch for a morning visit, okay? Half an hour for a formal visit is more than sufficient, and formal visitors do not remove their coats. You know how that worked, right? Homes had public spaces for social matters and private spaces for family matters. And that may be how the living room and the den evolved in the 1950s and 60s. I know growing up in West Texas, where things were already a bit more casual, my parents still received folks in the living room. And we only spent time in there when folks came over. We lived in the den, and we were banned from those sofas and chairs in the living room with their plastic covers on them. My siblings, my brother and sister, we referred to that room as the museum. Now, all that has certainly changed, right? We have peepholes now. I have a Ring doorbell, so I'm watching TV and the Ring doorbell goes off. You don't even have to ring it. Somebody just walks up, it senses their presence, and the TV show gets interrupted, and there's a picture of who's at the front door, okay? So peepholes, Ring doorbells, we can decide whether to answer the door or not. And there's always the exception, though, but my brother's home in deep East Texas has a number of dogs, right? And they always announce the arrival of anybody. So when we go to visit, By the 1990s, planting new congregations for the PCUSA, we quickly discovered this new social dynamic that roaming suburban homes nearby and knocking on doors at random, that is really frowned upon, and quite the wasted effort. Even as a young new pastor in my first call in the late 90s out in South Georgia, a rural town, I was tasked by the session to visit every member of the church. And boy, was that a challenge, because they didn't want me always coming by and bothering them, So anyway, that is so interesting, isn't it? Because an ongoing series of studies continues to show that people with many personal face-to-face contacts tend to be happier people. And people with fewer or no personal contents, not so, right? Still, many now consider folks who drop by to simply be an interruption in their daily schedule. Hopefully, we're finding alternatives to engage people face to face. The pandemic hasn't helped, right? But here's what I know. Most of us don't like to be interrupted when we're going about our very important tasks, right? We've got things to do, places to go, right? Studies do show, though, that in rural towns and in minority neighborhoods and cities, there are places where stopping by still exists. Social calling might even be increasing in these places because they're still working with a tight-knit community focused on survival, self-improvement, upward mobility, change. Against this rising tide, though, Precious Rev and I still greatly value and make a special effort to meet and get to know our neighbors, all of them, face to face. Another wonderful way to expand our neighborhood is to spend time face to face with other people in a wonderful congregation like this. Look around, though. We may realize that more and more today don't bother with actual social calls. Instead, they're consumed by technology, cell phones, email, texting, Zooms. You know, they're useful, aren't they? But having lived through the past several years of this global pandemic, we know what's missing, don't we? We can shake a hand. We can't see into other people's eyes unless we're there with them. We can't lean on a shovel in the garden and have a conversation over the hedge. We can't gather around the coffee pot or simply experience the conviviality of pleasantly shared silence. We can't do that unless we visit with others in person. There's just something special about being together, mano a mano, about taking the time to talk eye to eye. That makes such a God-graced difference in community unity. Now, last year, the session of our church in Conway started something new. Every first and third Tuesday, we gather in a large group in the fellowship hall. It's called Committee Nights, A and B. Now, it took pulling some teeth because people were kind of locked into, well, stewardship meets on Thursday, and worship always meets on Sunday afternoon. Well, kind of broke down some of those walls, and now committee night happens A and B, first and third Tuesdays. We begin with a prayer. There's a catered meal. It's not potluck, it's a catered meal. We hired a food truck guy, and he really knows how to cook. And so we get together and we eat, and then the various committees of the church, chaired by one of the elders on session, huddled around the room with groups, and everyone is encouraged to wander around and to participate, to listen, to bring their ideas, their concerns, to sign up, to get involved. It's been good for new-timers at our church. It's been pretty good for old-timers as well. It's been really helpful for Linda and I as we've met more and more people. We want to make sure, one of the reasons I only go out twice a month is because we moved to Conway, we didn't know that many people. We want some people to show up when we die, and so that we got to get to know them. This sort of engagement is exactly what didn't happen when the temple priest and the Levite passed by that injured man. Instead of taking the time to engage with their neighbor to help, they gave him a quick glance, some wide berth, and they walked on down the road. Granted, the temple priest did need to remain ritually pure, After all, he wasn't permitted to touch a dead body, which is what the priest might have been thinking when he saw that man laying in the road. Touch this close to dead man would have ruined his day and his profession by making him ritually impure, thereby preventing him from going about his very important business for God. The Levite, on the same journey as the priest, moves in close. He views the wounded man almost face to face, and then he too walks on down the road. Now, careful reading, and we know that the robbed and wounded man is Jewish. Did you stop to realize that? So is the priest. Likewise, the Levite. Think about that. This means that they are of the same community, maybe even the same church. It's like we're an American traveler in exotic Kazakhstan, and we meet another American in trouble, and it doesn't matter whether he's a Republican from Montana or a Democrat from Texas, or even if you've ever met before. What matters is that you're both Americans, and he desperately needs help. But you refuse aid. For whatever excellent, godly reason you have. And then later on, you learn that a Muslim discovered the plight of a member of your community that Muslim opened his heart and his wallet, and he took care of your community member in this emergency. Both the priest and the Levite had a chance to do what needed to be done, but they didn't. Flash forward to Jesus' question and command again. Which one of these was a neighbor to the man who was robbed? Go and do the same. Their misunderstanding of what's important, of what really matters, actually gets in the way of their compassion. It gets in the way of their humanity, their faith practice. Do you see that happening around you today? I ask this as much of myself as I do of you all, but here goes. When have you preferred to discuss a problem rather than act on it? What needed ministries still await our concerted action? And for that matter, what is there behind our delaying tactics? When we're honest with ourselves and others, I believe we must admit that over and over and over again, we have failed to act. We failed to see. We failed to feel. The Samaritan stopped to assist. He put in some face time. He stopped by for a very helpful visit. Jesus' story is very provocative, isn't it? Apparently, Jesus wants the whole world to see some Samaritan behavior that we realize should be Christian behavior. He stops, he uses olive oil, which was extremely expensive in those days. He puts the man on his donkey, he takes him to an inn, he spends 2 days' wages, he offers more to the innkeeper if necessary. All of this for a man he doesn't even know. A man who was, until this encounter, not his neighbor, according to the religious, political, social mores of the time. The question for us then is this: what do we pour on the wounds of the oppressed, the hungry, the at-risk, the marginalized in our communities? Do we offer our time, the kindness of conversation, the thoughtfulness of right actions, the warmth of an embrace, the generosity of our resources? Or do we find it much easier to offer indifference, ignorance, scorn, judgment, self-righteousness, my personal favorite, my way or the highway? Do we pour salt in our neighbor's wounds, or do we choose to anoint them with the oil of compassion? One of my good friends, a retired psychology professor from UCA, who's in a Bible study with me every Wednesday, has started stopping. There's a homeless man who hangs out on the corner up kind of near our house, and I've said hello to the guy before as I've driven by. I've even taken him like a bag of chips, bottle of water. Mark takes his lawn chair and goes out there and opens up that lawn chair and sits down and just talks to the guy. You're not trying to save him or convert him or anything. Mark just sees him as a human being. Wow. A Sunday school teacher was telling her class the story of the Good Samaritan, describing how he was beaten and robbed and left for dead. And she retold the situation in vivid detail so her students might visualize the drama. And then she asked the class, if you saw a person lying on the roadside, all wounded and bleeding, what would you do? A thoughtful little girl broke the hushed silence with this: I think I would throw up. Well, we might not throw up, but a lot of folks do give up. Being a neighbor in today's world that stresses anonymity over community, reserve over compassion, me-ism over otherism, challenge over commitment, can be challenged, to say the least. It might mean crossing economic and social lines. It might mean crossing cultural or racial divides. It might mean figuring out who our neighbor is by simply sharing 15 minutes across the hedge, or checking up on a neighbor, or lending a hand to a stranger. Talk to the people at Walmart and in the McDonald's. Just making eye contact on the sidewalk or in the hallway, or maybe stopping to save a life. Imagine what might happen in this country if we started behaving like that, like neighbors. If we took Jesus' story to heart, and if we endeavored to answer his provocative question, which of the three became a neighbor to the man attacked by robbers? The one who treated him kindly, the lawyer said right away. And Jesus said, you go and do the same. And now to God be all the glory. Amen.